Hey, so I've gotten this question a couple of times, so I wanted to do a quick video and answer and show what I do to answer the question. So the question has been, if you have your podcast on a page, so I have on my site, my podcast on one page like this, close that one page like this where I have like all of the podcast episodes listed. And it's not all of them, it's the last 12. So this is all automated. I'll show you that in a minute. On my podcast like this, where they're listed the last 12 episodes. And then each episode itself has its own specific page. So each podcast episode has its page where it has the player and some show notes, picture, anything else that I want to put about the guest, anything that I want to put there. This is pretty much its own page. So the question has come up, how do I do this without any plugins or anything like that? I know people have podcast players, stuff like that. I don't do any of that. I use natively what right in WordPress. So first thing is for the actual page itself that has all of the podcast episodes. This is, I'm going to hop right over to my WordPress. This is a page that I created and I named it just a Girl Get Visible podcast because that's what it is. And this is the little intro text that you see. These are the pictures that you see there. And then right here, you'll see this is a WordPress block that shows, and I'll get the name of the block here, the latest post. So if you used, and I'll add one so you can kind of see what it looks like. Okay, so I'll add one so you can kind of see what it looks like. I'll just put plus, add a block. There is a block that says, let me just put it up in here, post. And you'll see there's one here for your latest post. And so this is what I added. But in that latest post block, you can choose different settings. So I'll go back up here so you can see the settings I chose for this one. So I chose not to have all my post contents because I did not want like all of the text that goes with each post. But I did choose to display the post date because I wanted to see the dates that the episodes came out. Display the featured image because I wanted to bring in the image that is with each of the podcasts. And I would only do this for podcasts because I know all of my images or a majority of my images are the same with just the difference because I have my podcast art. You can choose whether or not you want the image size to be a thumbnail, medium, large, anything like that. The width, I kind of let all that be default. Center, right, justified. I chose to do newest to oldest. You can either do oldest to newest, A to Z, Z to A. Again, it's a podcast, so I want the newest thing showing first. Then here is what the real key is, the category. So this is all of my categories that I have set up in WordPress, and I'll show you guys that in a moment. But for podcast is where, of course, all my podcasts live. So this page is only going to show those that are tagged as podcast episodes. And then I can put the number of items. So I chose to do 12 with 4 columns. I could change it and do 3, and that'll now put like last 4. So I can move it around, change it. Actually, I think I like that. I'll leave that. Move it around, change it as much as I want to in terms of the numbers. And then you hit save. Before I do that, I'm going to delete this example I did. All right, while that's saving. All right, and you'll see that this is the exact page I just showed you guys. So I've got my little buttons up top here, and all of this is because I just wanted my little blurb, I wanted my buttons, and so that's why that's there. And then all of my previous, or not all, again, my last 12 previous podcast episodes. So that is how you do that in terms of creating the page. Now, on each individual post, here what I do to make the post show up as podcast is under the post. So I go into all my posts And I would generally create a new, but I just want to show you guys an example from all of the posts that I have here. You'll see that the ones that are podcasts, not all of my blog posts are podcasts. So like this one's a podcast. This one happens to be one too. Podcasts. Not all of them are. Some of them are. This one's not a podcast. I've got a couple. This one's not a podcast. So I've got a couple that are not podcasts, but they're still all on the blog post list. So I wanted to show you guys that part. So if you go into the actual editor, and all I do here, I use the embed code that is given to me from my podcast host. My podcast host is Libsyn, so I get it from Libsyn, but just about every podcast host will give you an embed code. That's what makes this little player show up at the top. That's what makes this little cute player here show up at the top. And then we type our show notes as regular. So whatever you normally would write, that's where your text would go. And then the important part to make the whole thing work is under categories, I added a podcast category and I click it in the category. Now, sometimes, as you saw with some of them on my list, I will put it also in a blog category because the blog has a page or I just want them all to show up together. I always make sure that podcast is primary for my podcast, just so I never break anything where I'm pulling, only my podcast episodes. Podcast is always primary, even if I decide. So if I do more than one, I'll just make sure that podcast is down here as the primary category. So that is what I do there. Then I add my art, do all the good things I usually do, hit update, and that's how you get to this page here. So that's how you do it. You don't need a fancy plugin. You don't need a podcast player or anything like that. You can just create your pages, create one page. And now that page that I showed you guys in the beginning, the first page I showed you, will continue to bring in the newest podcast episodes. I don't have to do anything in order to make sure that that podcast page stays refreshed or anything like that. I built it once and it's set it and forget it. Now, every time I add a podcast, as long as I select the right category, it is going to show up on that page. And so my podcasts have their own page and I have an overall podcast page. Hope this helped. Talk to you later.